I'm Vanessa, 30 years old, and I never expected to watch my stepfather Lawrence self-destruct in a lawyer's office. My mother Margaret had been gone just 3 weeks when Lawrence smugly declared he'd cut me out of her will completely. The tension in the room was suffocating as he pointed at me, practically spitting the words. "She gets nothing." I made sure of it. But then something unexpected happened. The lawyer actually laughed. What came next changed everything. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're from. Hit like and subscribe to hear how my mother outplayed the man who tried to steal her legacy. Growing up, it was just Mom and me in our modest suburban home. Margaret Taylor was a force of nature. A brilliant computer engineer who started coding in the early 90s when women in tech were even rarer than they are now. She'd tell me stories about being the only woman in the room, about men talking over her or trying to explain her own code to her. But my mom never backed down. When I was 10, she took the biggest risk of her life. She quit her secure job at a major tech firm and founded SafeStream, a cybersecurity startup that she built from our garage. I remember helping her set up the first server rack, not understanding what it did, but loving how my mom's eyes lit up as she explained it to me. Those early years were tough. Money was tight and Mom worked 18-hour days, but she always made time for me. "Vanessa," she'd say while helping with my homework, "education is something no one can ever take from you." We had this special tradition where every Friday night, no matter how busy work was, we'd have ice cream and watch old movies together. Mom called it our mandatory fun time, and those nights remain some of my most cherished memories. By the time I turned 16, SafeStream had taken off. Major corporations were licensing Mom's security protocols, and suddenly, our financial worries disappeared. We moved from our small house to a beautiful place in a gated community. Mom could finally enjoy the fruits of her labor, and I was so proud of what she had accomplished. That's when Lawrence Walker entered our lives. Mom met him at a charity gala for women in STEM. He was charming, sophisticated, and seemed genuinely interested in Mom's work. At 45, he was 8 years older than Mom and worked as an investment advisor. He drove a sleek black Mercedes and wore suits that cost more than our old monthly rent. At first, I was happy for Mom. After years of putting herself last, focusing on building her company and raising me, she deserved someone who would treat her like the amazing woman she was. Lawrence took her to fancy restaurants, bought her thoughtful gifts, and listened attentively when she spoke about work. He even tried to connect with me, bringing me books about strong women in history and asking about my college plans. But something about him never felt right to me. There was a calculation behind his smiles, a coldness that flashed in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. When he came to our house, I caught him studying our possessions, noting the artwork and electronics with an appraiser's eye. "He's just admiring your mother's taste," my Aunt Sylvia said when I mentioned it to her. "You're being overly protective." Perhaps I was. After all, Mom seemed happier than I'd seen her in years. 6 months after they met, Lawrence proposed during a weekend trip to Napa Valley. Mom called me, bubbling with excitement, to share the news. I tried to match her enthusiasm, but a knot formed in my stomach. "Don't you think it's a bit fast?" I asked carefully. "When you know, she replied. "Besides, I'm not getting any younger, Vanessa." The wedding was a lavish affair at a historic estate. Lawrence spared no expense, inviting over 200 guests, many of whom were his business associates Mom had never met. I stood beside her as maid of honor, pushing down my reservations and focusing on her happiness. After the honeymoon, changes began happening quickly. Lawrence suggested Mom cut back her hours at SafeStream. "You've built an empire, Margaret," he said during dinner one night. "It's time to enjoy life a little." That's what the executive team is for. Mom had always been deeply involved in every aspect of her company, but gradually, she started coming home earlier, delegating more decisions to her VPs. Meanwhile, Lawrence took an increasing interest in their finances. He convinced Mom to merge their accounts and suggested changes to her investment portfolio. "Lawrence is a professional," Mom said when I expressed concern. "This is what he does for a living." When I left for college that fall, I felt like I was abandoning her. But Mom insisted I focus on my education. "This is your time," she said, hugging me goodbye. "I've got Lawrence now. We'll be fine." During my freshman year, my calls home revealed subtle shifts. Mom was traveling more with Lawrence, attending social events and renovating the house to his tastes. The warm, comfortable home of my childhood was transforming into a showpiece with cold, modern furniture and abstract art that Mom would never have chosen herself. When I came home for summer break, Lawrence had hired a full household staff, a housekeeper, a chef, and a gardener. Mom seemed both pleased and slightly uncomfortable with the changes. "It's an adjustment," she admitted when we had a rare moment alone. "But Lawrence says I've earned this lifestyle." Over the next few years, as I completed my degree in computer science, following in Mom's footsteps, Lawrence's control grew more obvious. He began speaking for Mom during family gatherings, interrupting her and correcting her stories. Our Friday movie nights, which had survived my first year of college, were now regularly canceled because of Lawrence's social obligations. Mom's phone calls became less frequent, and when we did speak, Lawrence was often in the background, commenting or sometimes taking the phone to chat about their latest vacation or acquisition. The vibrant, independent woman who had raised me was slowly fading, replaced by someone who deferred to her husband's judgment more and more. When I graduated and took a job in the same city, I hoped to reconnect with Mom. But every lunch date was rescheduled, every visit to their home supervised by Lawrence. He had become the gatekeeper to my mother's life. And he made it clear that I was an outsider now. The call came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was at my desk, debugging code, when Mom's number flashed on my phone. Hearing her voice, I knew immediately something was wrong. The diagnosis was stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors had given her 6 months to a year. "Don't worry about me," she said, her voice steady despite the devastating news. "I've already started treatment, and Lawrence is taking good care of me." I drove to their house that evening, my mind racing with questions and fear. Lawrence answered the door, his expression grave. "She's resting," he said, blocking the entrance. "The medication makes her drowsy. You should have called first." "She's my mother," I replied, struggling to keep my voice even. "I need to see her." He reluctantly let me in but hovered during my entire visit. Mom was pale and thin, propped up on pillows in their massive bedroom. She smiled when she saw me, but her eyes lacked their usual spark. "The doctor is very optimistic," Lawrence interjected before Mom could speak about her condition. "We've scheduled consultations with specialists in New York and Houston." Over the next few weeks, I tried to be involved in Mom's care. I researched her type of cancer, joined online support groups for family members, and compiled information about clinical trials. But Lawrence dismissed my efforts. "We have the best oncologists in the country," he said dismissively. "What we don't need is amateur medical advice." Mom seemed torn between us, too weak to mediate the growing tension. When I brought up establishing a schedule so I could help with her care, Lawrence claimed it would disrupt her routine and add stress she doesn't need. Still, I found ways to be present. I'd arrive early in the morning when Lawrence was at the gym or visiting his financial office. During these precious moments alone, Mom and I reconnected. We talked about my job, her company, and sometimes revisited happy memories from before Lawrence. "Do you remember when we tried to bake a souffle for your science project?" she asked one morning, laughing weakly. "And it collapsed because we kept opening the oven to check on it?" These moments felt like glimpses of my real mother, not the subdued version who emerged when Lawrence was present. During one of these visits, Mom brought up her will. "I want you to know that you'll be taken care of, Vanessa," she said, reaching for my hand. "No matter what happens." "Mom, please don't talk like that," I said, fighting back tears. "You're going to beat this." She squeezed my hand. "Hope for the best, plan for the worst. That's how I built SafeStream, remember?" Her eyes started to the door before she continued. "I've been meeting with Harold Bennett. Do you remember him? My old friend from law school who helped me start the company." I nodded, recalling the kind elderly attorney who'd been at every major company milestone. "Trust Harold," she whispered. no matter what Lawrence says. Before she could elaborate, we heard Lawrence's car pulling into the driveway. Mom quickly changed the subject, asking about a new project at work. As her condition deteriorated, Lawrence tightened his control. He hired private nurses who reported to him, scheduled all her medical appointments, and began restricting her visitors, claiming she was too fragile for company. Even Margaret's sister can only visit on Sundays between 2 and 4, Lawrence's assistant informed me when I called to check on Mom. Mr. Walker is very particular about Mrs. Walker's rest periods. I noticed that Lawrence had started referring to Mom's company as our company in conversations. He attended board meetings as her proxy and made decisions about Safe Stream's direction without consulting the executive team Mom had carefully assembled. During one of my increasingly rare visits, I arrived to find an unfamiliar man leaving Mom's bedroom with a briefcase. "Who is that?" I asked the nurse. "One of Mr. Walker's associates," she replied vaguely. They had papers for Mrs. Walker to sign. Alarmed, I entered Mom's room to find her looking exhausted and troubled. "What did Lawrence want you to sign?" I asked gently. She shook her head slightly. "Just some company matters. Lawrence says it's important to prepare for the transition." "What transition, Mom? You're still the CEO." Her eyes welled with tears. "I'm so tired, Vanessa. Sometimes it's easier to sign than to argue." I wanted to press further, but she had already closed her eyes, the conversation clearly over. In her final weeks, Lawrence's gatekeeping became nearly impenetrable. He cited doctor's orders that Mom needed complete rest and limited my visits to 15 minutes, twice a week. He was always present during these brief encounters, watching and listening. Mom passed away on a quiet Sunday morning in April. According to the nurse, Lawrence was by her side. I wasn't called until hours later. "Your mother went peacefully," Lawrence informed me, his voice formal and detached. "The funeral will be on Thursday. My assistant will send you the details." I hung up the phone and collapsed into tears, mourning not just my mother's death, but all the final moments with her that Lawrence had stolen from me. The funeral was exactly as Lawrence wanted it, extravagant, formal, and impersonal. The church was filled with massive floral arrangements, professional photographs of Mom and Lawrence together, and hundreds of people, many of whom I'd never seen before. Business associates, Lawrence's friends, and society figures from their country club mingled in black designer attire. I sat in the front row, next to Aunt Sylvia, while Lawrence stood at the pulpit delivering a eulogy that focused more on Mom's business success and their perfect partnership than the amazing woman she had been. "Margaret and I shared a vision," he said, dabbing at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. "We built a life of significance together." I wanted to scream that he had only been in her life for 4 years, that he knew nothing about the woman who had stayed up all night helping me with science fair projects, who laughed until she cried at bad comedy movies, who taught herself to code from library books when she couldn't afford classes. After the service, Lawrence orchestrated a reception at their home that felt more like a networking event than a memorial. He moved through the crowd accepting condolences with practiced grace, occasionally gesturing toward me with a pitying look, playing the role of the strong widower supporting his stepdaughter. "Vanessa is taking it rather hard," I overheard him telling a group of men in expensive suits. Margaret always worried about her emotional fragility. My mother had never once suggested I was emotionally fragile. In fact, she had always praised my resilience. This was the first of many lies Lawrence would tell to shape the narrative after Mom's death. As guests began to leave, I approached Lawrence about collecting some of Mom's personal items, her old journals, the family photo albums, her favorite books. "Now's not the time," he said dismissively. "The house is still full of people. We'll sort through Margaret's things properly later." But later never seemed to come. In the days following the funeral, Lawrence ignored my calls and texts. When I drove to the house unannounced, the security guard at the gate informed me that I wasn't on the approved visitor list. "There must be a mistake," I said, stunned. "I'm Margaret Walker's daughter." "I have my instructions, miss," he replied uncomfortably. "You'll need to contact Mr. Walker directly." It took 3 days of persistent calling before Lawrence finally answered. "Vanessa, I'm quite busy with Margaret's estate matters," he said impatiently. "What is it?" "I'd like to come get some of Mom's personal belongings," I explained. "Family photos, her jewelry, things with sentimental value." There was a pause before he responded. "I'm afraid that won't be possible right now. The will is still in probate, and nothing can be distributed until that process is complete." "These aren't valuable items, Lawrence. They're personal mementos. Everything must be inventoried for the estate," he insisted. "It's the legal process, Vanessa. Surely you understand that." I didn't understand. These were family items that had nothing to do with Mom's financial assets. But Lawrence was unmovable. 2 weeks after the funeral, I received a troubling call from Elena, Mom's executive assistant at SafeStream for over a decade. "Vanessa, I probably shouldn't be telling you this," she said in a hushed voice, "but Lawrence came into the office yesterday with movers. They cleared out your mother's entire office, including all her personal files and photographs." When our HR director questioned him, Lawrence said he was acting as the executor of the estate and had full authority. I thanked Elena for the information and immediately called Harold Bennett, Mom's longtime attorney whom she had specifically mentioned trusting. His secretary informed me that he was out of the country but would return the following week. Meanwhile, disturbing reports about Lawrence continued to reach me. My cousin Jordan called to say he'd seen Lawrence at a luxury car dealership buying a new Porsche. A family friend spotted him dining with a younger woman at an exclusive restaurant. Mom had been gone less than a month, and Lawrence was already living like a wealthy bachelor. The most alarming call came from Mom's college roommate Patricia, who had attended the funeral. "Vanessa, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but Lawrence was telling people at the country club that you've been cut out of the will entirely. He was quite explicit about it, saying Margaret had changed her mind about you in her final days because of some falling out between you two. This was a complete fabrication." Despite Lawrence's interference, Mom and I had remained close and there had been no falling out. But Lawrence was clearly laying groundwork, spreading lies to make it seem reasonable that Mom would disinherit her only child. When I finally connected with Harold Bennett, he was appropriately outraged on my behalf. "This is nonsense," he assured me. "I've been Margaret's attorney for 20 years. She would never cut you out." "Lawrence claims the will is in probate," I told him. Harold's pause was telling. "That's interesting, because I haven't filed anything yet. The will reading is scheduled for next week. I've been out of the country, and Lawrence agreed to wait until my return." "So what's happening with Mom's estate right now?" I asked, increasingly confused. "That's what concerns me," Harold replied. "I'll look into this immediately. In the meantime, plan to be at my office next Friday at 10 for the official reading." I arrived at Harold's downtown office 15 minutes early on the day of the reading. The reception area was already filled with people, Aunt Sylvia and her husband, two of Mom's cousins, a few executives from SafeStream, and some of Mom's oldest friends. Lawrence arrived last, flanked by two men in suits whom he introduced as his financial advisors. He barely acknowledged me, taking a seat across the room and leaning in to whisper to his companions, occasionally glancing in my direction with a smug smile. My stomach tightened with anxiety. Could Lawrence have somehow convinced Mom to change her will? Had he manipulated her in her weakened state? The whispers I'd heard about being cut out. Harold Bennett's office exuded old-world professionalism with its dark wood paneling, leather-bound law books, and the faint scent of pipe tobacco. As we all settled into the conference room, I felt like I was in a scene from a movie. Family members gathered anxiously, the attorney preparing to reveal secrets from beyond the grave. Harold, a distinguished man in his 70s with silver hair and kind eyes, had been more than just Mom's attorney. He'd been her friend and advisor since before I was born. He nodded reassuringly at me before beginning the proceedings. "Thank you all for coming today," he said, placing a thick folder on the table. "We're here for the reading of Margaret Taylor Walker's last will and testament." I noticed he used Mom's maiden name as part of her legal name, something that clearly irritated Lawrence, whose mouth tightened at the corners. "Before we begin," Harold continued, I want to express my personal condolences. Margaret was not just a client, but a dear friend for over 20 years. Her loss is deeply felt by all of us. Lawrence cleared his throat impatiently. While the sentiments are appreciated, Harold, we all have commitments today. Perhaps we could move this along? Harold gave Lawrence a measured look before nodding. Of course. Let's proceed. He began reading the formal legal language of the will, starting with smaller bequests. $10,000 to her alma mater for a scholarship fund, her collection of first edition books to the local library, a specific painting to Aunt Sylvia. Each item was accompanied by a personal note explaining its significance. As the reading continued, I noticed Lawrence becoming increasingly agitated, checking his watch and shifting in his seat. His associates exchanged glances, their earlier confidence seeming to waver. This is all very touching, Lawrence interrupted after Harold detailed Mom's gift to her former assistant. But perhaps we could skip ahead to the main assets? The house, the investments, safe stream? That's what we're all here for, isn't it? Several people looked uncomfortable at his bluntness, but Harold remained unruffled. The will is structured as Margaret wished it to be, Lawrence. We'll get to the remaining assets shortly. Lawrence leaned back with an exaggerated sigh. Fine. Continue with the trinkets. Harold resumed reading, but Lawrence's interruption had changed the atmosphere in the room. The tension was palpable as everyone waited for the revelation of the major assets. Finally, Harold reached a section about SafeStream. Regarding my controlling interest in SafeStream Technologies, Inc., he read, I direct my trustees to. This is ridiculous. Lawrence suddenly stood, his face flushed with anger. Why are we pretending? Everyone here knows Margaret changed her will during her final months. He pointed at me dramatically. She gets nothing. I made sure of it. The room went completely silent. All eyes darted between Lawrence and me. Even his associates looked surprised by his outburst. Harold set down the document and removed his reading glasses. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he laughed. It wasn't a big laugh, just a short, incredulous chuckle, but in the tense silence, it seemed to echo off the walls. Mr. Walker, Harold said calmly. I'm not sure what document you're referring to, but this is Margaret's valid last will and testament, signed and witnessed 6 months before her illness. Lawrence's face reddened further. That's not possible. I have a newer will, signed 2 months ago. My attorneys handled it. Those would be the gentlemen who aren't here today? Harold asked pointedly. Lawrence turned to his associates. Tell him, Arthur. Tell him about the revised will. The older of the two men shifted uncomfortably. Lawrence, we should discuss this privately. There's nothing to discuss. Margaret signed a new will. I watched her do it. Harold cleared his throat. Sir, even if such a document exists, which I highly doubt, it wouldn't affect the majority of Margaret's assets anyway. Lawrence stared at him. What are you talking about? I'm her husband. Everything passes to me. Under normal circumstances, you would have a strong claim to a significant portion of the estate, Harold acknowledged. However, you can't change a trust that already transferred assets last year. Lawrence's face went white. What trust? Harold opened another folder. The Margaret Taylor Living Trust, established 14 months ago, which transferred the majority of her assets, including her controlling interest in SafeStream and approximately $15 million in securities and cash equivalents to her beneficiaries. The room erupted in murmurs. Lawrence looked like he might pass out. That's impossible, he whispered. I would have known. The trust was created before your marriage, Harold explained. Margaret was quite deliberate about the timing, and as her separate property brought into the marriage, she had every legal right to establish it without your knowledge or consent. I sat in stunned silence. Mom had never mentioned a trust to me, yet apparently she had planned this all meticulously, anticipating Lawrence's potential actions. Who? Lawrence demanded, his voice hoarse. Who are the beneficiaries? Harold looked directly at me as he answered. Vanessa Taylor is the primary beneficiary of the trust, with secondary distributions to Margaret's charitable foundation for women in technology. "This can't be legal," Lawrence sputtered, pacing the length of the conference table. "Margaret was my wife. I had a right to know about major financial decisions." Harold remained impassive. "California is a community property state, yes, but separate property acquired before marriage remains separate unless explicitly commingled." Margaret was very careful to maintain distinction between her premarital assets and your marital community property. "When?" Lawrence demanded. "When did she do this?" "The trust was established in February of last year," Harold explained, "and funded completely the following month. Well before her diagnosis, I might add. So there can be no question of diminished capacity." The timing suddenly made sense to me. February of last year was when Mom had made that unexpected trip to visit me, claiming she needed a girls' weekend. We'd spent 3 days together, and she'd seemed unusually reflective, asking me about my long-term goals and what I thought about her legacy. She must have been preparing for the trust arrangements. "Let me explain how the Margaret Taylor Living Trust operates," Harold continued, addressing the room rather than just Lawrence. "It's an irrevocable trust, meaning once assets are placed in it, they cannot be removed or the terms changed, even by Margaret herself." Lawrence collapsed back into his chair, his face ashen. "The trust holds several key assets: Margaret's 70% ownership stake in SafeStream Technologies, the family home in Woodside and its contents, her personal investment portfolio valued at approximately $15 million, and various other personal properties." Harold turned a page in his document. "As trustee, I've been managing these assets according to Margaret's explicit instructions since the trust was established." "If the house is in the trust," I asked, finding my voice, "why has Lawrence been living there and controlling access?" "An excellent question," Harold nodded. "The trust grants Lawrence a life estate in the residence for a period of 90 days following Margaret's death, after which the property reverts fully to the trust beneficiaries. Those 90 days expire next month." Lawrence's associates were now whispering urgently to him, but he seemed beyond hearing them, staring blankly at the table. "What about Mom's personal belongings in the house?" I asked. "The family photos, her jewelry, her journals?" "All trust property," Harold confirmed. "Margaret specifically inventoried items of sentimental value and designated them for you, Vanessa. I have the complete list here." He patted another folder. "Lawrence has no legal claim to any of those items." One of Lawrence's associates finally spoke up. "What exactly does Mr. Walker receive from the estate?" Harold consulted his papers again. "As Margaret's spouse, Mr. Walker receives her half of the community property acquired during their marriage. This includes their vacation home in Lake Tahoe, joint bank accounts totaling approximately $800,000, and the vehicles titled in both their names." "That's it?" Lawrence looked up, incredulous. "After 4 years of marriage?" "Given that your marriage lasted only 4 years, and considering the significant assets Margaret brought into the marriage, this distribution is quite generous under California law," Harold replied evenly. "The trust also provides a one-time payment of $500,000 to you, Lawrence, which Margaret described as appreciation for the companionship during our time together." Someone in the room let out a low whistle. Mom's parting gift to Lawrence was both generous and a subtle acknowledgement that their relationship had been more transactional than loving. "As for SafeStream," Harold continued, "the company remains under the control of the trust, with Vanessa holding voting rights for her mother's shares. The executive team Margaret appointed remains in place, with no changes to the corporate structure." The implications were sinking in for Lawrence. Not only had Mom protected her assets from his grasp, but she'd done it over a year ago, meaning any changes he might have coerced during her illness were meaningless. "This is fraud," Lawrence finally said, his voice cold. "Margaret never discussed this trust with me. She hid assets from her husband. No court will let this stand." Harold seemed prepared for this response. "I assure you, everything was done with meticulous legal care. Margaret understood exactly what she was doing and why." He looked pointedly at Lawrence. "She was concerned about certain behaviors she had observed, particularly regarding financial control." Lawrence stood abruptly. I'm not listening to this slander. My attorneys will contact you." He gestured to his associates to follow as he stalked toward the door. "One more thing, Mr. Walker," Harold called after him. "The trust includes a litigation deterrent clause. Any challenge to the trust by a named beneficiary results in that person's complete disinheritance. While you're consulting with your attorneys, you might want to consider whether risking your $800,000 and Lake Tahoe property is worth pursuing a battle you're unlikely to win." Lawrence froze at the door, his back rigid. Without another word, he walked out, his associates trailing behind him. After they left, the room seemed to collectively exhale. Harold turned to me with a gentle smile. "Your mother was an extraordinarily intelligent woman, Vanessa. She saw what was happening and took steps to protect both you and her legacy." "Why didn't she tell me about the trust?" I asked, still processing everything. "She wanted to shield you from Lawrence's potential reaction," Harold explained. "She knew if you were aware of the trust, he might pressure you for information or try to drive a deeper wedge between you. This way, your genuine surprise today helps protect the trust's integrity." Harold then revealed that Mom had been meeting with him regularly during her illness, not to change her will as Lawrence believed, but to finalize details of how the trust would operate after her death. "She left you letters," Harold said, sliding a sealed envelope across the table. "This is the first one. There are others to be given to you at specific times, according to her instructions." I took the envelope with trembling hands, recognizing Mom's handwriting immediately. Even as her body had failed her, she had been thinking ahead, putting plans in motion to protect me from the man who had slowly isolated her from everyone she loved. As the other attendees began to leave, offering congratulations and condolences, I sat alone with the knowledge that Mom had seen through Lawrence's facade all along. In her own quiet way, she had fought back, using the business acumen that had built her company to outmaneuver the man who thought he had controlled her completely. Lawrence's reaction to the trust revelation was swift and vicious. Within days, his attorneys filed motions challenging the trust's validity, claiming Mom had been unduly influenced by Harold and that Lawrence had been fraudulently kept in the dark about marital assets. Harold seemed unfazed by the legal onslaught. "This is exactly what Margaret anticipated," he told me during our meeting to discuss the challenges. "She documented everything meticulously, including Lawrence's concerning behaviors. It turned out Mom had been quietly building a case of her own. She kept a detailed journal documenting Lawrence's financial control tactics, how he had isolated her from friends and family, pressured her to change her company leadership structure, redirected her assets, and even recorded conversations where he made concerning statements about her money. Your mother was playing chess while Lawrence thought they were playing checkers," Harold said with admiration. "She installed a security system in the house that Lawrence didn't know about, with cameras in her home office. We have footage of him going through her files when she was at chemotherapy appointments. Most damning of all, Mom had hired a private investigator 3 months before establishing the trust. The investigator uncovered Lawrence's previous pattern of targeting wealthy women, marrying them, and leaving with substantial settlements. 2 ex-wives had signed non-disclosure agreements as part of their divorces, but Mom's investigator found ways to document the pattern. Margaret was preparing for a divorce before her diagnosis, Harold explained. When she became ill, she shifted to protecting her assets through the trust instead. While Lawrence's legal challenges proceeded, I faced a more immediate problem, recovering Mom's personal belongings from the house. According to Harold, I had every right to enter the property and collect the items listed in the trust inventory, but Lawrence had changed the locks and security codes. "We could get a court order," Harold suggested, "but that would take time. The 90-day period expires in 3 weeks. It might be simpler to wait." But I couldn't wait. I'd received disturbing information from the SafeStream office manager that Lawrence had been seen removing artwork and electronics from the house. I was afraid he was selling or hiding items that rightfully belonged to the trust. Harold agreed to accompany me to the house, along with a locksmith and a sheriff's deputy, with a copy of the trust documents establishing my right to access. When we arrived, Lawrence's Porsche was in the driveway. The deputy rang the bell while we waited on the front steps. Long minutes passed before Lawrence finally opened the door, his appearance shocking me. The polished, sophisticated man who had charmed my mother was gone, replaced by someone disheveled and hostile, with several days' stubble and bloodshot eyes. "What is this?" he demanded, glaring at our group. The deputy calmly explained that we were there to collect specific personal property belonging to the trust, as was my legal right as beneficiary. "She's not setting foot in this house." Lawrence snarled, pointing at me. "This is still my residence for another 3 weeks. Your life estate grants you occupancy," Harold corrected him, "but does not give you the right to prevent the trustee or beneficiaries from accessing trust property. If you prefer, we can return with a specific court order, but that will likely include penalties for obstruction." Lawrence's face contorted with rage, but after a tense standoff, he stepped back, allowing us to enter. "Fine. Take whatever's on your precious list. It's all worthless junk anyway." The house I'd grown up in had been transformed under Lawrence's brief ownership. Mom's warm, eclectic style had been replaced with cold, modern furniture and abstract art. Family photos had disappeared from the walls, replaced by expensive but soulless pieces that meant nothing to our family history. We proceeded methodically through the rooms, checking items against the inventory list. Many smaller items were missing: Mom's collection of vintage brooches, several first edition books, the antique silver frame that had held my grandparents' wedding photo. "Where are these items?" Harold asked, showing Lawrence the list of missing pieces. "How should I know?" Lawrence replied with feigned indifference. "Margaret moved things around all the time." As we continued our search, I noticed subtle signs that Lawrence had been liquidating assets. Receipts from high-end consignment stores lay partially hidden under magazines. An email confirmation for an auction house pickup was visible on a tablet he'd left on the coffee table. We found most of the larger items: Mom's artwork, her desk, her collection of vintage typewriters. But many smaller, valuable pieces were simply gone. It was when we reached the master bedroom that things escalated. "I need to check the closet safe," I said, referring to the hidden compartment where Mom had always kept her most precious jewelry, including my grandmother's wedding ring that was meant to come to me. "There is no safe," Lawrence said quickly. Too quickly. I walked directly to Mom's closet, moved aside the panel I'd known about since childhood, and found the safe empty, its door hanging open. "Where is my grandmother's ring?" I demanded, turning to Lawrence. "It's specifically listed in the trust inventory." "I have no idea what you're talking about," he said. But his eyes darted to his own closet momentarily. While Harold and the deputy were checking another room, I made a split-second decision. I walked to Lawrence's closet and pulled open the drawer of his nightstand. "You have no right." Lawrence lunged toward me, but I had already found what I was looking for. A small leather pouch containing several pieces of Mom's jewelry, including my grandmother's ring. "This is theft," I said, holding up the pouch as Harold and the deputy returned. "These items belong to the trust." Lawrence's face twisted with hatred. "That ring was a gift to me from Margaret. She wanted me to have it." "That's interesting," Harold said mildly, "considering she specifically listed it in the trust inventory as my mother's diamond ring, to go to Vanessa as her birthright." Lawrence suddenly lunged toward me, grabbing for the pouch with such force that I stumbled backward. The deputy immediately stepped between us, restraining Lawrence as he shouted obscenities. "You're just like your mother," he spat. "Thinking you're so smart, so superior. She was nothing before me. Nothing." His mask had completely slipped now, revealing the true person beneath the charming facade. The deputy radioed for backup while maintaining his hold on Lawrence, who continued his tirade. "I earned that money for years of listening to her boring stories, pretending to care about her stupid company, enduring her clingy daughter. I deserved everything she had." Each word confirmed what I had suspected all along. Lawrence had never loved Mom. She had been nothing more than a financial target to him, a wealthy woman he could manipulate and control. As additional officers arrived and Lawrence was escorted from the property for threatening behavior, Harold placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Your mother knew," he said quietly. "That's why she created the trust. She wanted to protect you from exactly this." In the days that followed, we discovered the extent of Lawrence's financial misdeeds. He had been systematically selling items from the house, liquidating assets he thought he would inherit, and had even attempted to access SafeStream's corporate accounts using Mom's passwords. With each revelation, the legal case against him strengthened. Lawrence's challenge to the trust crumbled as evidence of his behavior mounted. His own words during his outburst, witnessed by a law enforcement officer, became part of the court record. 2 weeks later, the judge not only dismissed Lawrence's claims against the trust, but issued a restraining order preventing him from entering any trust property and froze his personal accounts pending investigation of the missing items. The final blow came when we discovered a hidden safe in Lawrence's home office containing documents that revealed his careful planning. Spreadsheets detailed Mom's assets before he'd even met her. Notes outlined his strategy for isolating her from family and friends. There was even a timeline for taking control of SafeStream after marriage plus 5 years. Mom had discovered his true nature eventually, but rather than confronting him directly, she had quietly outmaneuvered him, protecting both her legacy and me with the same strategic brilliance that had built her company. As Lawrence's legal challenges fell apart one by one, I began the process of reclaiming not just Mom's physical legacy, but her emotional one as well. The family home was mine now, and with Lawrence permanently removed by court order, I could finally begin healing the space that held so many memories. I started by undoing Lawrence's cold renovations, restoring the warm colors Mom had always loved and replacing his modern furniture with pieces that felt like home. Friends and family helped, turning the work into a celebration of Mom's life rather than a reminder of loss. "Your mother would love what you're doing," Aunt Sylvia said as we hung family photos back on the walls. She always said a house should tell the story of the people who live there. The trust Harold now managed for me was substantial, more money than I could spend in a lifetime. After careful consideration, I decided to use a significant portion to establish the Margaret Taylor Foundation for Women in Technology, providing scholarships and mentorship to girls interested in computer science. "The foundation should reflect your mother's values," Harold advised during our planning meetings. What mattered most to her? The answer was clear: education, opportunity, and fostering independence. We structured the foundation to support not just education but entrepreneurship, helping women launch tech startups just as Mom had done from our garage all those years ago. SafeStream continued to thrive under the leadership team Mom had assembled. I took a seat on the board but maintained my own career, honoring Mom's belief that I should build my own path rather than simply inherit hers. As the months passed, I discovered more about Mom's final year through the letters she had left with Harold, to be delivered at specific intervals. Each one addressed a different aspect of life she wanted to share wisdom about: career, relationships, finances, finding purpose. "My dearest Vanessa," one letter began. "By now you know about Lawrence and the trust. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive, but I needed to protect you from his manipulation. I realized too late what kind of man he truly was. But I want you to know that creating the trust wasn't just about keeping money from him. It was about ensuring that what I built would continue to create good in the world through you." Her words brought both tears and healing. Mom had seen through Lawrence's facade eventually and had found a way to fight back on her own terms. 6 months after the will reading, Lawrence's legal options were exhausted. The court had not only upheld the trust completely, but had ordered him to return or pay restitution for the items he had sold from the house. His reputation in the financial community was destroyed by the revelations about his predatory pattern with wealthy women. I heard through mutual connections that he had moved to another state, presumably to start over with a new identity and target. The knowledge troubled me until Harold shared one final safeguard Mom had created. Margaret anonymously funded a private investigator to create a secure database of Lawrence's methods and targets, he explained. The information is shared with women's advocacy groups and financial advisors who work with wealthy women. She wanted to ensure he couldn't do to anyone else what he tried to do to her. Even in her final days, facing her own mortality, Mom had thought about protecting others. It was the ultimate expression of the strength and foresight that had defined her life. On the 1-year anniversary of Mom's passing, I invited her closest friends and colleagues to the house for a celebration of her life. We shared stories, laughter, and the kind of genuine connection that Lawrence had tried so hard to prevent. Looking around at the people who had truly loved and respected my mother, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since before her illness. Mom had won, not just against Lawrence, but against the fear and isolation he had tried to create. Her legacy lived on not just in her company or the foundation bearing her name, but in the connections between the people gathered in her home. The final letter from Mom arrived that evening after everyone had gone. Harold handed it to me with a gentle smile before leaving. "Your mother wanted you to have this today specifically," he said. "She said you'd understand why when you read it." Alone in Mom's study, surrounded by her books and the soft lamplight she had always preferred to harsh overheads, I opened the envelope to find a shorter note than the previous ones. "My darling Vanessa," it read, "if you're reading this, a year has passed since I left you. The worst of the grief may be behind you now, and you're finding your way forward. I want you to know that watching you grow into the strong, compassionate woman you are was the greatest joy of my life. More than any business success, more than any wealth, you are my true legacy. Trust yourself as I trusted you. Your instincts about Lawrence were right from the beginning, and that same intuition will guide you well throughout your life. All my love, always, Mom." I held the letter to my heart, feeling a connection to her that transcended death. In the end, Lawrence had failed completely. He had tried to separate us, to rewrite our family narrative, to steal not just Mom's wealth, but her very legacy. Instead, he had ultimately strengthened the bonds he sought to break and taught both of us valuable lessons about trust, protection, and the power of careful planning. The experience had changed me, making me both more cautious and more determined to live authentically. I would carry forward not just Mom's financial legacy, but her values: independence, strategic thinking, generosity, and the courage to protect what matters most. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to deal with someone who wasn't who they pretended to be? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the quietest warriors win the most important battles.